Okay, perfect. So welcome to this lunchtime session for the TASA migration, I've forgotten, ethnicity multiculturalism thematic group. And today we are going to be learning and talking about publishing in academic journals. So I'm joining you today from Sydney University's Camperdown campus, which stands on the traditional lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And so I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of that land, and also obviously any of the traditional owners of the lands which you guys are zooming in from as well. Yeah, so my name's Leah Williams-Veazey. I think most of you know who I am anyway. I work at Sydney University in the Sydney Centre for Healthy Societies, and I'm co-lead of the Migration, Immobility and Belonging Research theme there, and also co-convener of the TASA MEM thematic group with Kat Stevens, who's also here today, and Kathy Martin, who couldn't join us today. And we're absolutely honoured to be joined by the co-managing editors of the Journal of Intercultural Studies, Melissa Phillips and Paula Muraca. And that's a Taylor and Francis journal, if anyone's interested in that. And so I'm not going to do any more introductions because, as Melissa and I discussed, Paula is very what's the word did I say? I'm a woman of mystery online. So it's very difficult to find information about her. So I'm going to preserve your air of mystery, Paula, and just say that you are the co-managing editor of the Journal of Intercultural Studies. And I will hand over to you both. I know you've got some slides to share. So we'll start with your presentation, and then if you can just hold your questions to the end, if that's possible. I mean, you can pop them in the chat if you think you might forget them, but if you hold your questions to the end, then we'll have a Q&A at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Thanks, Kat, and thanks everyone for joining. So my name is Melissa Phillips, and I'm a senior lecturer at Western Sydney University, coming to you from Darug land, and wanted to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and anyone on this call today. Paula, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Paula Muraca, and so I work at Deakin University on the Journal of Intercultural Studies, and I've just completed a PhD, so that happened. And over to you, Melissa's going to run through our first slides, and then I'll take the rest.
Great, thanks, Paula. So yes, we've organised it so that we've got a couple of slides just to introduce the journal and talk a little bit about the process. We don't want to inhibit any questions or conversation. So if during our presentation you want to clarify anything, please just pop your question in the chat. But at the end, we're happy to have a broad conversation about anything we've talked about. And we're also, I'm going to say, happy to be contacted after this if you have any further follow-up. And thank you to the MEM group for inviting us to present. So I actually wanted to say that when I started my PhD, I joined TASA and I joined the MEM group. And it was Dr. Vince Marotta, who was part of that group at the time, who invited me to be involved with the Journal of Intercultural Studies. And I was a brand new PhD student, and I felt pretty like, how on earth could you ask this of me? I don't know what to do. But with Paula, who's been brilliant at orienting all of us to the journal, I was able to start as an associate editor. And recently, Paula and I have taken on the co-managing editor. Paula's been co-managing editor for much longer than me, and has a lot of institutional knowledge. But it was through TASA MEM that I got involved in the journal. So thanks to TASA as well. So as you said, Leah, we are a Taylor and Francis journal. For what that means, I guess there are many different publishers and many different sort of groups out there. I think, Paula, if I'm correct, we are the only Taylor and Francis journal that's housed in the outside of the UK, if I recall correctly, or outside. Anyway, I can't hear you so well. Oh, you're on mute, sorry. Okay, while Paula fixes that, I might just keep going. Is that okay? Just interrupt me when you're off mute. I can still see the sign. So the journal's quite broad ranging. We seek to
Hello, sorry, I'm off mute now.
Yeah, go for
Sorry. We are not the only Taylor and Francis journal hosted from Australia, because we also have our friends at Continuum.
it. Okay.
Yes. So, but I think that you could say that we're the only one in kind of migration scholarship that's hosted in Australia. Thanks, Melissa.
Stay off mute so you can keep adding in things. And our goal is really to showcase innovative scholarship on a broad range of areas like cultural formations, intercultural negotiations, contemporary challenges, and broadly constituted themes around culture and identity. So if you've had a look, or if you take a look after this presentation, you will see one of, I think, the strengths of the journal is that there is a breadth and a depth to what we are able to bring forth in the journal. And we really also appreciate and value that intersection of cultural studies and migration studies. So we know that there are, journals that are firmly situated in one or the other, but we really like to look at areas between the two, within the two, and take a disciplinary approach that brings in sociology, literary studies, gender studies, anthropology. It is very wide-ranging. And we're housed at the Alfred Deakin Institute for Citizenship and Globalization that also support the journal. So within the advisory board, and I guess that when you're looking at any journal, you're usually looking at who's part of the team. So I'm just going to move this over. We have our editor, Professor Fethi Mansouri, Paula and myself as co-managing editors. We have a number of associate editors whose names are there, and we have a book review editor. And in the slides, which I'm happy to share after the presentation, there's a much broader advisory board. And I'm happy to talk about the difference maybe in the Q&A session, but for now, that's our broad editorial board. I would say a little bit of patting on the back here, but we're really proud of the work we do, particularly because we're looking at that intersection between cultural studies and migration. We have a really wide readership for the journal, a significant number of downloads, and we also reach I didn't mean to get to that, but we also reach a really wide geography of readers and submissions. Of course, for people who are immersed in academia, citation metrics and all of those impact factors are significant. I mean, they're significant for us too at the journal. It's one metric of our reach and the value within the work that we present through the journal. So I have that up there. I don't know, Paula, if you wanted to highlight anything. I know the Q1 is always important to mention.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, that's what people value increasingly. Our institutions push us to publish in Q1 journals. So it is important for us. We're Q1 in cultural studies and history, which is an unlikely FOR for us. We don't know how that popped up, but we're not going to question it too much.
Thank you. And yeah, that's a bit about our submissions. So as you can see, we get submissions from many different places. That ebbs and flows. We often have a ping of submissions from a particular country, or we publish a journal article with a particular geographic focus, and that might lead to more. I'm not sure if there's any rhyme or reason, but really what staggers us every year when we look at our metrics is where our submissions come from and that broad reach. And that is deliberate because we want to be a journal that isn't just speaking to in an echo chamber, and we'll talk more about that in a moment, myself as a migration scholar, I see other journals, and often journals talk about trying to reach to new voices, or they encourage people from different geographies or different parts of the globe to submit, but it's not often realised in their table of contents. And I would say we really do make an effort from submission right through to publication to ensure that we reach people and scholarship across many different locations, and that is something that we're really proud of. Now I'm going to hand to you, Paula. Is that yours? Yes.
Yes, thanks, Melissa. Thanks so much. So we kind of were trying to work out what would be helpful to present, and I think just from our own experiences, there's lots of different things you might look for different papers or for different purposes in a journal. And here's just a few things, and it'd be great to hear a little bit more from you guys at the end if you feel like sharing about what you kind of look for increasingly in a journal. So one thing you might look for is obviously the research scope, to make sure that you're really talking to the right community or the community that you want to talk to. And so in that case, it's kind of helpful to look at journals that are in your FOR and to really look at what distinguishes them. You can get I feel like you can get a sense of the subtle politics of a journal by looking at their contents. What do they increasingly publish, or what are they leaving out? You might just have that need for speed that we often have, in which case it's very easy to gauge that by looking, particularly at Taylor and Francis journals. They have a kind of speed index on our homepage that really can stress people like Melissa and I out, because it really means we have to get those decisions out quickly. But another good indicator of speed is just to look at how many issues are in a volume of a journal, because many will have 4, some will have 6. Others, like is it ERS has 12, I think, ethnic and racial studies. So that those are also good indicators of how quickly something might get out. The editorial board or the content is also, are you just looking to be in good company or in scholars that you admire their work? I think this one's important to me, which is the dignified and smooth experience. I think that journal or academic publishing can be kind of a brutal space for so many reasons. It's increasing automation. It's, I don't know, it's meanness. It's gatekeeping meanness sometimes. And so I think asking colleagues what their best journal publication experiences have been is also, I think, a good, oh, are you finding it hard to hear?
No, it was a comment on what you said. I'm so sorry.
No, that's good. That's good. As long as you're hearing, we can talk a bit later. So yeah, I think a dignified and smooth experience is something that I look for. I think also quality feedback, because in many cases, journals can be kind of almost like having a good supervisor if it's done properly. You can really be a process that can level up our work. And that's certainly what everybody at the journal is trying to do. Melissa, can we have the next slide, please? Thanks so much. So here's a few kind of like little tips, and I think maybe I'm very sorry if you already know these things. So, but obviously getting reviews quickly is increasingly difficult. The reviewer situation is oversaturated. Many of you will have reviewed for journals, and you know that when you're doing it, you don't have time to do it. You're making time that doesn't exist. And so one of the things that I've seen, and I've been with this journal for over 10 years, and increasingly what I see is that the articles that are difficult to get reviewed have difficult to read abstracts. because we always send the abstract with the invitation to review. And so it's what the reviewer first has a sense of your paper. So if they are already time-strapped, and we know they are, they're not going to sign up to read a 9,000 word version of something that the 200 word version is difficult to read. They just don't. So sometimes it's helpful for Melissa and I to ask authors to finesse an abstract or to help finesse, because, you know, we really don't want that to be a barrier for things getting out quickly in review. Having like really clear titles. And again, like I'm sure you know this. So not having many acronyms, making sure that the purpose of the argument is clearly signaled. And also I think the context, because we're an international journal, it's really important to say, you know, where your study is situated. So we're not doing any kind of inadvertent universalizing. And then there's a couple of little points that I've put there at the end that just have to do with, you know, that kind of discoverability as well as getting stuff reviewed, which is, you know, put in those kind of juicy participant quotes. We often see them at the beginning of a title, but actually the Google overlords really want us to put them after the semicolon, because I think anything after a semicolon is less discoverable. And then also just including keywords. So yeah, those are the kind of things that'll get your paper out there quicker in terms of getting a good reviewer. Next slide, please, Melissa. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about our peer review process, because, you know, peer review is incredibly important, but it's not just naturally ethical, I don't think. Just because we have 2 blind reviewers doesn't mean it's an ethical process. So everyone at the editorial team at the Journal of Intercultural Studies has thought really hard about this. And what we do, and this kind of connects to what Melissa was talking about a little bit earlier, about constantly engaging wider geographical circles of knowledge, geographical and cultural circles of knowledge, constantly engaging that. We do that in our review process as well. So we don't have a list of reviewers that we use. It's very rare that we'll repeat a reviewer. So what we do is we literally just do research to find an expert in the field wherever they are, and we'll just cold call them effectively. And it seems to work because people who are researching in that area want to know what's coming up. So it works for us, and it also means that our authors have their work read by an appropriate expert. We also look for, and I should say this connects to my own research. My PhD was in intercultural knowledge politics, so this kind of connects to that, my own interests in research. We also make sure that your research, well, we cannot ensure this, but we try to make sure that your research is read by people who are culturally and politically appropriate to your study. So basically, we're looking for people who will just understand the rationale. We don't want a peer reviewer that is struggling to understand the rationale of the study or the reason why it has to happen. We need the expertise to move beyond that. Thanks, Melissa. So the other thing I would say is we don't just pass the reviewers on automatically. So all the feedback is mediated, usually by our fabulous associate editors who Melissa introduced earlier on, and then by either Melissa or myself. And we're looking to make sure that we can not cherry pick, because authors do get the entire reviews, but we want to make sure that we're highlighting what we think will actually be helpful, and make sure that if there are aspects of the review that we think will not be helpful or will take an author down a road that they don't need to go down, we'll say that in our letter, just to make sure that there's quality feedback and it's an expedited process. Because we know that revision is a lot of work and that authors put a lot of work and thought into it. I wanted to just highlight here one thing, which is, obviously authors do a fantastic job of incorporating reviewer feedback and thinking about what reviewers say. But I think if you disagree with an aspect of editor feedback or reviewer feedback, my advice would be to actually write to the editors and start that conversation before you revise. This has happened many times with authors reaching out and saying, hey, I don't think that this is the right course for me, and this is why. And those conversations have really stayed with me as really good encounters, good conversations that have been had over email. And it means that when the revision does come in, all those negotiations and those dialogues have already happened, and I can read it as the way it was intended to be read a little bit more. So I think that I'm guilty of this as well, is that sometimes when I don't necessarily agree with one piece of reviewer feedback, I'll give a little, one sentence justification in my letter to or response to reviewers saying, I didn't necessarily do this because blah, blah, blah. And that's all fine, but I do think that that's better done earlier in the process. It just means that dialogue around that, the development of the knowledge is happening much earlier, and there's no risk of things being misunderstood or pushed back. Anyway, you know what I mean, at the late stage and also after the author's done so much work. And this is quite obvious, but the clearer you mark up your changes, the quicker the revision's read, is another little tip. And now I've just put a few little bits and pieces on publication, dissemination, and impact. Taylor and Francis have all these reading and publish agreements. I'm sure many of you know about these, and if not, we can talk a little bit more in the Q&A if you like. But they basically mean that if you are affiliated with an Australian institution, then you are likely to have free access to an open access publication. But what you might not know is that the email that you use when you submit is really important to you accessing that license easily. So if you've changed or moved institutions, make sure you update that email when you make that submission. If you're using a Gmail, then basically Taylor and Francis will send you a license that won't be open access, but you should definitely flag your institutional affiliation at that point, so that you do have that free access to open access available. And the other thing I wanted to flag, which may be helpful to you, is that being part of a large commercial publisher like TNF means that we have these huge media and comms facility available to ourselves and the authors. So if you think that your research is newsworthy, and this obviously goes to impact, so this very elusive word that has become so important, but if you think it's newsworthy, then we can actually flag that with Taylor and Francis, and they can get it into the news. They do that. So I feel like that's something that we don't use enough of, and that authors don't use enough of. And I think that we should be all using their resources more. So this is Taylor and Francis' definition of newsworthy research. This is their criteria. So major breakthrough in the field, impact on society, effects on day-to-day lives of ordinary people, a recommendation for change or a new approach, and just if it's timely and connects to some kind of newsworthy or topical moment. So that's quite a broad set of criteria or framework. And so what you would do is just email your editor, and say, I think it could be newsworthy, and then we'll take care of the rest. And finally, if once you're published, you can share it on the socials. And what I would recommend is that you share the full text e-prints, the free e-prints that you get from Taylor and Francis. You're allowed to share those. And that's it. And hoping for some questions, things we may not have covered that you're interested in. Thank you so much for hosting us.
Thank you so much, Melissa and Paula. Thank you. It was such a wonderful presentation. And, you know, I've been publishing in journals for quite a while, but I still learned quite a lot of useful stuff. So I am assuming that everyone else did too. So I'm just going to bring to a close the recorded section of the session, and then we can have an open conversation. Any questions, yeah, get them together. But just for now, I just want to say thank you very much, Melissa and Paula. Thank you.
Leah.
Thank you.